guys. This is Cheyenne Heflin, and welcome back to The Confiscated Leg, a podcast where I take you through the good, the bad, and the funny things that have happened to me after pediatric cancer. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about my experiences in handling other people's reactions to me, both as a pediatric cancer kid and as an above-knee amputee. Cancer is one of those things where, as the patient, it's really hard for you to sort of hide the fact that you're going through it. Especially if you're like me and you decide the only things that a wig is good for is making you hot in Florida and making you itch in Florida. Both of which are things that already happen by naturally being in Florida. And so one of the biggest fears and one of the biggest things that I dealt with post-chemotherapy and especially post-amputation was dealing with other people's reactions to my being an amputee and a cancer patient. Thankfully for me, I've never had too many bad experiences. Most of the time, if someone's bothered by the fact that I'm an amputee or that I mentioned that I was a pediatric cancer patient, they don't really tend to say anything about it to me. I credit that to the fact that I've been so open about it in the first place. And the few people who I have run into who have been rather rude about the fact that I am physically disabled at age 21 have been so, I guess, irrational or emotional about it that it's easy to sort of brush it off as they don't get it or they just think I don't deserve X, Y, or Z because I'm young and disabled. However, that doesn't mean that it was easy for me to get used to the fact that people would comment on, hey, you lost your hair, what's going on? What happened? How did you lose your leg? And all those sorts of other questions that you can imagine come up as a pediatric cancer patient and as an above-knee amputee. And so in this episode, I kind of want to go through the initial reactions that me and my family had adjusting to the amputation after I'd made the decision and went through the surgery, as well as sort of transitioning into these new fears that I had about dealing with people in public and sort of some of the general experiences that I've had as a pediatric amputee and as a pediatric cancer patient since I was diagnosed and going up to today, where mostly I just deal with people being like, hey, how did you lose your leg? Initially, after my surgery, a lot of the adjustment and the reactions I had to deal with were obviously within my own family circle, because those were the people that cared about me, the people that were seeing me all the time while I was still going through chemotherapy and such. I was really, really nervous about how my sisters were going to handle this whole big change, because they were so young at the time and probably didn't really understand exactly what was going to happen before I actually went in and got the amputation done. And so I was really worried, not just about how I was going to handle it, but also how my sisters were going to deal with the fact that Cheyenne can't get up and just come play with you anymore because she has to use crutches or she needs to go put on her prosthesis and all these other thoughts that were running through my head. Interestingly enough, they never reacted very negatively to the fact that I had lost a leg. If anything, they were mostly just confused. And I found that watching them kind of get used to, like, my residual limb and the fact that my leg wasn't there and I was dealing with feelings in this leg that didn't exist called phantom pain and phantom limb sensation, they sort of just had to reaffirm to themselves that it wasn't there anymore, especially my youngest sister, because she was only, like 7 or 8 at the time, maybe. So she was still pretty young. And I found that it was a lot of having to, like, come over and, like, place a hand on my residual limb to be like, yeah, there's no leg there anymore, and watching me sort of deal with, getting into a wheelchair, getting on my crutches, being sore, talking about it as if it were its own thing instead of just the lack of a thing. And so they really focused in on like constantly determining, yes, there's no leg there anymore, and then watching how I reacted to that fact. And so, because I was trying to make the most positive thing I could out of it and following my dad's advice, trying to crack jokes about it, because if you can laugh about something, you can't be doing that bad, right? My constant reaffirming that everything was okay and that we were moving forward in a positive direction helped my sisters also learn to cope with it a bit faster. My dad, obviously, and my grandparents on my dad's side were all very supportive about what was going on, and we basically just accepted the new reality and worked to deal with it as much as we could. My biggest problem within my family came from my mom. A little backstory about my family situation. My parents divorced when I was 5 years old, and then I chose to move out of my mom's house when I was 11 because I didn't think she could take care of us anymore. She had problems of her own. She had been going downhill for years, and so at 11 years old, I chose to move in with my dad and stay there. And so by the point in time that I ended up in the hospital, and especially by the point in time that I had gone through the amputation, I had barely seen my mom, let alone talk to her, just because it was hard to deal with the fact that she kept trying to ask me to come back, even though I knew that that wasn't what was good for me or my sisters. So you can imagine with a situation like that, that her reactions to my going through the amputation were less than pleasant for me. A lot of it was constantly. She never tried to look towards the future and what I could possibly do once I got better. It was constantly only focusing on the loss that had happened and the fact that she wasn't there for it. Now, I want to say I didn't want her there for that exact reason. I made the choice to not ask her to come to the surgery. I'm not even sure if she would have come if I had asked, but the point being I didn't want her there because I wanted to focus on moving forward. The only things she would say to me during the time immediately after the amputation were things like, "I'd give you mine if I could. I wish you hadn't have had to have lost yours." Over and over and over and over again. And these were just the sorts of thoughts that were unhealthy for me at the time, at a time where I was trying to think about how I could get back to some sort of normalcy after willingly letting the doctor cut my own leg off. And so it was this interesting dichotomy between this one chunk of my family who kind of just followed my reactions, and we kept trying to progress forward and think about, oh, well, eventually you'll be able to get a prosthesis and then you can start learning to walk again, and who knows, maybe one day you'll be running. We don't know. You just got to work at it. And really, my mom and her whole side of the family, who I wasn't as close with at this point in time, who could only focus on the fact that Cheyenne lost her leg, Cheyenne lost her leg, Cheyenne lost her leg. And so for me, this made it really difficult to kind of internalize what exactly I was thinking about the fact that I had made this decision. I mean, I was already nervous about people staring at me because I had no hair, right? And now I was nervous about people staring at me because I had lost my leg. And those people didn't even know that I had made the decision by myself. Like, what would people think of the fact that I chose to amputate my own leg at 13 years old? I was pretty sure at the time that a lot of kids wouldn't get a choice in that decision. I was lucky enough that my orthopedic surgeon wanted me to be a part of the decision, and I knew that it was the best for me, the best thing to make sure that I could get out of this chemo treatment and move on with my life. But how could I focus on moving forward if so many people in my life could only focus on what I had lost? And so I just had to kind of cut those people and those reactions out of my life and keep telling myself that as long as I work at it, as long as I focus on moving, ironically, one step at a time forward, I would get out of chemo treatment, I would be cancer free, I would have a prosthesis, and I could work on getting back to my life. And so by the time I got out of treatment for osteosarcoma, I had sort of solidified my path I wanted to move forward on. I didn't want to think about what I had lost. Obviously, there was still a lot of grief there in the fact that I had to make that decision, but I wanted to channel those feelings and do good by myself. Work on getting up to walking, going back to school, getting out of my wheelchair more, just proving to those people who couldn't see past the loss and to myself that just because I didn't have two full flesh and blood legs did not mean that I couldn't do what I wanted with my life. It was really after this point and after getting out of treatment that I started sort of seeing patterns in how people would sort of react to such a young amputee and pediatric cancer patient. There was either people staring and not saying anything, or people saying things and not staring. And so I kind of want to just go through a few of the different experiences that I've dealt with and how I sort of tried to handle those experiences in a way that was healthy for me and in a way that hopefully could be a teaching moment for people about, yes, I am disabled at 13, 14 years old, but that doesn't mean I can't do what I want, sort of thing. One of my favorite things to deal with on a regular basis is when little kids and their parents are like walking by and you watch the little kid's head turn and they're just staring at me as they walk by. Usually I don't get the chance to talk with them about it, but every once in a while someone's kid will be like, "Mom, she doesn't have her leg." And then you watch either A, the parents tell their kids to go ask me about it, which I really appreciate because I love talking about it, or B, the parents say something along the lines of, "You shouldn't say that." And so I like to take dealing with kids as a teaching moment. I like to reassure parents, first off, that I'm not offended by their kid going, "Hey, this lady's missing her leg," because yes, I am missing my leg. You are correct, small child. But I like to reassure them and then take this as a teaching moment to show kids that there are diverse groups of people in the world who handle things maybe a bit differently than them, but we're all still going about and doing the same thing. And so I like to tell the kids that I got really sick, that my leg got really sick, depending on how old they are. If they're really young, I say my leg got sick because it makes a little more sense to them. And that I had to get rid of my leg in order to make myself better. And then if they're young enough, I will throw in there that the prosthetic was made by Iron Man. If anyone can get me in touch with Robert Downey Jr., I would love it if he could make me a small video to play for these children because they get so excited when I tell them that Iron Man made my prosthetic leg. And I tell them to keep it as a secret between us. And it's one of the most amazing things that comes out of such a morbid experience for me is to watch these little kids' faces light up in understanding when I tell them that Iron Man made my prosthetic leg. And it's just so nice to be able to show other people, and especially young kids, that yeah, I function a bit differently than you. I don't have two real legs. I have one real one and one fake one. But here I am in the grocery store shopping just like you and your parents are. And it's a nice way to sort of move past the bias I think we have in society sometimes, where you see someone who does something different than you and you kind of get nervous or awkward about it. There are some people who get nervous and awkward about it, and I do understand when that happens. It happened to me a lot in high school because I was always so open about it, cracking jokes from the first day of class. And I think a lot of people just didn't know how to handle how open and aware I was that I was disabled, that I was missing a leg, that I had gone through cancer. And so occasionally you'd get the classmate who would get a little awkward about things or offended that I would make jokes about myself. Or in some cases, people who just legitimately didn't know how to react to what I was doing. And I would always kind of try and explain that to me, humor is a way to reassure myself and reassure other people that I'm handling the situation okay. When I crack a joke, it's meant to break the ice. It's meant to let you know, hey, I know that I'm disabled. I know that I very obviously have a prosthetic leg that you're probably staring at because you, like me, probably haven't seen many in real life. And that's okay. And we can move past it and we can just be two people or be a class of people who are doing what they do in school. Occasionally, you'd have people who would vocalize that they were a little uncomfortable with something. Usually, this happened to me when I would have to take my prosthetic off in the middle of the day. And then, the illusion that there's a leg there is sort of gone now. You're seeing the difference between the two limbs because I have taken one off. And to those people, I just want to say that that's perfectly fine if you've ever felt that way around me, if you're someone who's ever been around me. And to other people who might be going through a similar situation that I did, I want to say, don't get too offended by people reacting that way. Because, heck, I reacted that way the first few times I had to take my own prosthesis off. It's natural to kind of be confused and a little disturbed by something that you've never been exposed to before. And so to people who are going through that situation, I just want to say that your reassurance and your sort of, not even reassurance, your lack of opinion on it, you just going out there and being yourself and taking your leg off when you need to, is really what kind of tells people that they don't have to be bothered by it because you're not bothered by it. You're just living your life the way you want to. Of course, that doesn't work with everybody. And occasionally there are the people who get offended by the way I'm acting as an amputee, or they get offended because they think for some reason that just because I am young and disabled does not mean I should get all the same rights as other disabled people. You would think this doesn't happen in real life. I can assure you it does. Typically, these people are the ones who see me pull into a handicap spot at a store because I can't walk that far sometimes, or I'm not wearing my leg that day, and because I'm not old. No, that's really just it. Because I'm not old and disabled, they seem to think that I shouldn't be allowed to do the things other disabled people would do. One prime example of this that happened to me in real life. My best friend and I had driven south. I was going to an oncology appointment, and I was also going to go visit some of my old nurses at the hospital literally next door. And so we had gotten to the hospital and we're going through the parking garage looking for a handicap space so I didn't have to walk too far to get to the elevators. We pull up to the next floor and see a handicap spot on the other side of this truck that's in the way. And so as soon as the truck's out of the way, I pull into the parking space, and I'm like, yes, I don't have to walk too far. I wasn't feeling that good today. The elevator's right over there. Perfect. And so we start getting out of the car. It's like one of those few cold winter days in Florida. And so I was wearing, miraculously, jeans, so you couldn't see right away that I was wearing a prosthesis. And out of the corner of my eye, I watched this car pull up beside me and stop, like in the lane, as if they were going to drive by. And I turn around, and this lady has put her window down, and she glares at me with one of the nastiest glares I think I've received in my life. And she starts accusing me of having known that she was going to pull into that parking space, that handicap parking space, and purposefully stealing it from her. I would like to say for the record, she had a handicap license plate, not a handicap placard hanging on her dash. And she accused me of being able to see the back of her car in the next aisle over, and basically saying, screw you, I'm going to take this handicap space. I was so stunned by this interaction that I couldn't find words to tell this lady how wrong she was. Thankfully, my best friend came around from the other side of the car and started telling this lady, look, I know she's wearing jeans, but she has a prosthetic, she can't walk that far. But this lady did not care. She just basically said, because I was young, didn't matter that I was disabled, because I was a young person, I was purposefully screwing her out of a handicapped parking space, and then she sped off in the parking garage. We were so stunned by this interaction that I didn't fully process what had happened until we got back in the car an hour or so later. But this is a great example of people, it's a rarity for me, thankfully, but occasionally there are entitled, I hate saying it, entitled old people who seem to think that it doesn't matter that I am literally missing 2/3 of one leg. Because I am young, I do not deserve to use handicap accessible areas and other things handicapped people would typically use. And it's a really, really frustrating experience because I already struggle with this dichotomy between I feel like a young person and I should be able to do whatever I want, and no, that's not true. There are plenty of days where I'm stuck on crutches or in my wheelchair because I've hurt myself or my residual limbs bothering me and I can't use my prosthetic. And it's a really frustrating reality that I have to deal with, especially as someone who, ever since the amputation, has struggled with the dichotomy between I am only 21 years old and really I should be able to do what I want, the prime of my life is ahead of me, and hey, there are plenty of days where I've hurt my ankle on the one side and can't use my prosthetic and I have to be in a wheelchair. My residual limb has a problem and I can't use my prosthetic leg, and so I'm stuck on crutches or in a wheelchair. And the reality is that at any moment, something could make it so I can't walk around on my own two legs like I wish I could be, and I have to use one of these mobility aids, in which case I desperately need handicap spaces and other resources like that, because there's no other way for me to be able to go and do these things that I love to do. And to people who do that sort of stuff to me, I get that you think you're entitled to it because you're older than me and you've been on this earth longer than I have. But you haven't been through what I've been through. You didn't make a decision at 13 years old to get an amputation done, not knowing how that was going to affect the rest of your life. So don't judge me for parking in the handicap space because I'm feeling a bit tired today and I don't want to wear myself out to the point where I injure myself. To the people who are dealing with these sorts of interactions in public, I honestly don't have a lot of good advice, because even to this day, I still struggle with not getting angry when I see old people glaring at me from the parking space over, or people comment on the fact that I'm using the space, even though it's very obvious that I have a prosthetic leg. I can only tell you that you have a right to use these resources as someone who is disabled, and nothing changes that. Like, you have a right to use this stuff, and you just kind of have to cling to the fact that you have been given the right to use these things, and so you need to use them in the way that works for you and in the way that makes it so you can do the things you want in a healthy and safe fashion. Thankfully, that's not something I've dealt with very often. And when it does happen, I tend to just brush it off and move on because there's no point in clinging to the negativity that can come out of other people's mouths. Other than those experiences, there's a few common comments that I tend to get when I am out doing things. They're not bad comments necessarily, and I want to put out there that none of these things offend me in any way. I'm very open to everyone's comments and ways of interpreting things. And in my opinion, like, it just, if someone says something, you kind of just brush it off and don't let it bother you. But I know that for some people, a couple of these can be a bit awkward or even offensive depending on who you ask. The first of which, and probably the most, I guess, complicated of the two, is when I'm out doing something and someone comes up to me and says, "You're such an inspiration." If you are someone I know and you have said this to me in the past, I am not offended in any way, and I just like to say thank you, because to me, "You're such an inspiration" is an acknowledgement of struggle that I have gone through, and an acknowledgement of, hey, you're out here doing the exact same things I am, even though you have to do it in a different way that I do. And I get it for a lot of things. I used to get it a lot more when I was still missing my hair, because then it's very obvious that I am an amputee and also going through cancer. But even nowadays, every once in a while, the first time I went to the university gym, I had gone to the university gym with my best friend, and I was horrified because I've never set foot in a gym in my life and I hate exercise. And so I had just done like a mile on the treadmill or something, which is a big deal for me as someone who can barely walk around every single day. A mile on the treadmill is amazing. I got off the treadmill and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know that you're such an inspiration and it's awesome to see you out here working out." And I said, "Thank you," and I moved on. If anything, that made me feel pretty good. Like, people acknowledge that I'm out here struggling, as it is, to better myself and to get healthier. To me, that doesn't bother me. But I know some people who the "you're an inspiration" comment is a bit more, not negative exactly, but they don't really like hearing it. And I feel like it just depends on the situation in which you are disabled, depending on what your disability is, as well as maybe how long you've been disabled. Whether your interpretation of "you're an inspiration" is kind of just a positive, hey, they see what I'm going through and that I'm out here like them, or something else. But to me, it's always been a very positive comment. And I appreciate when people recognize that I'm out here trying to do the things I want to do. It just makes me feel a little bit more confident in what I'm doing and that I'm doing it successfully. Of course, we talked about little kids going, "Hey, why is your leg like that?" Although really, little kids are so open about it that I see absolutely nothing wrong with kids asking about it. It's typically parents who seem to think that it's rude to ask. And I will say, it sort of does depend on who you ask. I consider myself very open and confident in my disability because of where I came from, but I know that not everyone is, and so it might bother other people. And if you are one of those people, all I can say is, they're little kids. Don't let it bother you too much. They're just trying to process the reality they live in, and you just came across it. The most awkward, the most awkward comment that I get in real life multiple times over the course of a year is "thank you for your service." Because people tend to think that I have served in some branch of the military and that's where I lost my leg. Now, I have no idea how to deal with this one. It's so awkward. It happens way too often for me to not have some sort of like common response to give for this, but it's so awkward because the two options I have right now are either thank you and just let the person walk away, or go, oh no, I had cancer, which then makes people feel bad. I don't know how to deal with this one. Thank you for your service. It's just, I feel so bad every time I get this one in public because I'm just like, I'm either gonna lie to you or make you feel horrible for saying that, and I'm so sorry. But it's just one of those, it's just a reality of being, I guess, especially now that I'm a bit older and I've like hit my 20s, being like in your 20s and being an amputee, I guess people probably don't expect that the reason you're an amputee is pediatric cancer, seeing as you don't hear about pediatric cancer amputations very often, and I know this for a fact. It's just one of those awkward moments that comes with being young and disabled, I guess. But it's also one that's like harmless. And really that's the thing I want to say as a takeaway about all of this. Other people's reactions and other people's opinions about my being a pediatric cancer kid and a young amputee are harmless, essentially. They're just other people's opinions, but it's taken me I've been an amputee for 7 years now. It's taken me 7 years to get to the point where I can confidently say that they feel harmless. When I was in high school, I was constantly worried about other people's reactions to my being a cancer kid. Teachers? Oh no. Every time I had a new teacher, I was so worried that they were just going to react so negatively to having a disabled kid in their class. And even now, when I see professors for the first time and I have to talk about them about my disability accommodations through the university, I'm still nervous that they're just going to react super negatively about having a disabled kid in their class. But where originally other people's opinions made me way more uncomfortable, by now I kind of just accept the fact that other people are going to have varying reactions and understandings about my being an amputee. And that's okay. Because it doesn't matter what other people's thoughts are, it matters how you interpret and handle them, which is something I'm still working on and I'm still learning how to deal with sometimes. But my biggest advice about dealing with other people as a pediatric cancer kid and as an amputee is that you really just need to focus on your own interpretation of your situation. All I wanted to do after I got my amputation was get back to a point where I could feel sort of normal and just work on living my life in this new way that I was going to have to do it. And now here I am in my senior year of university, hoping to apply for a psychology PhD program so I can work on all these psychological and social issues that I have encountered over the past. And I can confidently say that I don't regret my decision to go through with my amputation, and I don't regret the way that I have lived my life as an amputee ever since I went through the surgery. And so that's my advice to other people who are going through this sort of situation, is just focus on your own interpretation of what's going on and how you feel, because that's going to carry you farther and longer than anyone else's opinions and thoughts about you is going to. And that'll be it for episode 2 of The Confiscated Leg. I want to thank everyone for coming back and listening to the second episode of this podcast. I know it's been a really long time since I posted the first one, but I'm coming back into it now with clearer ideas of where I want this to go and what I want to do, both with the podcast and my blog, as things that I've been passionate about for the longest time. If you're not subscribed to this podcast, you can subscribe to it on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else you happen to listen to them. And I look forward to talking with you guys again in a couple of weeks.